Joining us on the Movies and Stuff show, co-writer of Star Trek First Contact and so much more, his current show Outlander can be seen on Starz, Ron Moore. Ron, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure.
I guess let's start with that, if you don't mind. Outlander just seems like it's such a beast of a show to oversee. And, you've written or produced for Star Trek Next Generation, Deep Space Nine. You've done Generations, First Contact, Carnivale, Battlestar Galactica, Caprica, Helix. You've done so much on and on and on. But yet, Outlander still seems like the biggest in scope you've worked on. Is that, you find that to be true?
It's probably the biggest. I mean, Carnivale was probably a close second. They were both big, sweeping period pieces. Outlander just presents a lot of unique challenges because of the nature of the story itself, in that it travels, it goes from place to place, it picks up characters, it drops them, it shifts locations radically. The first season took place exclusively in Scotland, the second season goes to Paris, and then returns to Scotland. It's just a very large production to sort of get your arms around, both in the story and just the logistics of actually producing it on the ground. And you're doing two period pieces. You're doing the 18th century, and then it has a foot in the 20th century as well. So it's it's a pretty complicated show, but it's great.
Yeah, I'm totally looking forward to season 2. Yeah. But right now we're really talking First Contact, and it's a 20th anniversary in 2016. So that's really exciting. Yeah. And I don't know if I should say this, but I have read Pillar's unpublished book. And the hoops he had to jump through to get script approval on Star Trek Insurrection was really eye-opening. So I'm assuming that you had to jump through hoops, or you and Braga had to jump through hoops as well. You've already done Generations. You're working on Deep Space Nine at the time, so presumably you're a tad busy. Did you both jump at the chance to write First Contact, or did you have second? Maybe not.
No, I think we both signed up pretty quickly. I think both Brandon and I think I can speak for him in this regard, felt that the Generations was a very difficult movie to write and to get our arms around as writers. It was our first feature. It was the first transitional movie of that cast into features. We were sort of presented with a big laundry list of all the things that had to happen in that movie. And it was just a hard movie to make, and a lot of scrambling, a lot of rewriting, and it didn't turn out as well as I think any of us wanted. So when the opportunity came to do First Contact, we did kind of jump at it because we wanted to get it right. We wanted to have a better experience, and we wanted to do a better movie. And it just was. I mean, it has been 20 years, so I'm sure my memory is rosy to a certain extent. But I know that we did have more of a blank sheet to start with. It wasn't like a big list of requirements that had to be in that movie. So we could just sort of start over, and we could just sort of approach it, fresh, and say, okay, what do we want to do? What kind of movie would we like to do? And it was just a freer sort of experience overall. Working with Jonathan Frakes was really easy and great. And the script did go through quite a bit of story changes at the early drafts, as I recall. But once we sort of figured out what the movie was, it really wasn't that difficult. I don't think, from our point of view.
Yeah, and it's amazing. And, to me, First Contact is definitely one of the best Star Trek films, and it's certainly my favorite one. It's just a great concept, and it's cool to hear you say that you had this blank slate really to work with. Now, how did that central plot idea that, of the movie come about? Like, what was kind of the inspiration to say, this is the movie we're going to make?
I think there were a couple of different things going on. One was we came around to the idea of who's the big villain in the next movie? Let's do the Borg, because we had sort of stayed away from the Borg, in the TV show. We'd done a couple of episodes here and there, but they weren't big time villains, and as a result, they had a certain mystique to them at that point. So we sort of said, let's do something with the Borg. I think Rick Berman was interested in doing something with time travel, and then separately from that. Patrick, in particular, I know, really liked that we did an episode of Next Gen called Starship Mine, where he was alone on the Enterprise and had to sort of fight for his ship in a sort of a Die Hard kind of scenario. Kind of talked about how much he liked that and enjoyed that. And I remember us sort of saying, hey, we should, Patrick's always wanted to do this sort of, Starship Mine thing. Maybe we should go back and combine elements of that. So we kind of moved that into the plot to a certain extent as we developed it. Originally he had the story that was what we kept referring to downstairs and upstairs in the story. Downstairs on the planet was more Picard, was downstairs dealing with Zephyr Cochrane and the ramifications, how to make history repeat itself and all that. And then upstairs, the Enterprise was being taken over by the Borg, and Riker and company were up there. And Patrick he really liked that Starship Mind paradigm. So at some point, we just kind of switched them and said, okay, let's put Picard upstairs, but Riker downstairs. And so that's kind of how that the final piece of the structure sort of came about.
That's really cool. And I got to say, I think one of the coolest parts about First Contact is we really got to see some Borg versus Starfleet action on the screen. I thought that was awesome. But I've gathered from the way other people talk, who I guess have read earlier drafts or something, I don't know, that maybe it was going to be a little bit bigger. The fights, like more Borg cubes coming at Earth or being destroyed. Was that budgetary, or was that you trying to keep the Borg from being diminished?
I don't recall if there were multiple cubes or not. That could be, but that's stretching back a little further than my memory. I mean, it was definitely bigger battles overall, and it was all reduced for budgetary reasons. The big fight over Earth was a much bigger battle. The interior fights aboard the Enterprise were bigger. They were just more elaborate, much more, run and jump and bigger explosions. And the truth was, Paramount did not spend a lot of money on the Star Trek movies in those days. They had a very sort of rigid template. They kind of said, Star Trek movies make X amount of dollars, therefore the budget will be Y. And that was kind of what they handed you. And like, oh, well, that's a lot of money compared to what we did the TV show for. But you just quickly found out that the cost of everything at the feature level just cost you more. So we were still sitting around production meetings and arguing about, how many phaser shots could be in the scene. Well, 10 phaser shots. Can you get away with 5 phaser shots? And you sit there and you're like, trading and dealing. And well, if I make it 7 phaser shots, can I get the transporter effect, on the next scene? I mean, it was madness, and it was exactly like being in a TV production, which is what we did day in and day out. And you went to the feature world, and it was the exact same conversation. And so if you really look at First Contact, you'll see that the actual number of phaser shots, whether outside or inside, are kind of limited because we were trading them. We were trading them like cards, like trying to, how much money each visual effect. We were literally calculating each individual shot from visual effects budget of how many we could afford, how many ships you could blow up at the big battle, how many photon torpedo shots. It was such a pain in the ass.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Oh man. And you touched upon this a little bit earlier, just talking about, Picard's kind of more action hero type-esque mentality in this film. And there's some fans that kind of debate whether it was true to his character on the TV show. Do you see it? Is it the same Picard TV show to movie, or did you have to write it a little differently? Was it acted a little differently for the film as opposed to how he would do it on the TV?
I would say the emotional arc is definitely rooted in the TV show. Everything, it was very much about his experience as Locutus, how that affected him psychologically and emotionally, and carrying forward those feelings into the film, and his struggle with all that felt very much like an outgrowth of everything we had done in the series. The action adventure stuff was certainly pumped up to a level that you never saw on the TV show. Patrick wanted to do it and liked to do it, and had been looking forward to doing something like this. And I think he always wanted to do it in the TV show, but the constraints of the television budget were such that you just really couldn't do very much like that on what we did week in, week out. You just didn't have the time. Shooting action scenes where he takes his shirt off and grabs onto the rope and goes up to the top of engineering. It's great shots and they look really cool, but they take an enormous amount of time to set up, and we just never had that kind of time on the TV show. So I think Patrick would have liked to have done it, all through the show, but we just didn't have the wherewithal to do it.
And I love talking to writers on our show, and one of the things I love to do is just trying to get into their headspace, get a sense of how they approach writing a movie or writing a show. And some people that have been associated with Carnivale have just kind of felt the writing process was akin to like fighting as a gladiator. Now, do you really think that the Trek writing was really that harsh of a writing room?
Oh, I wouldn't say it was harsh. I think it was, it was combative. I mean, you went into those rooms, and we were a very tight staff, both at Next Gen and Deep Space. You spend hours every day with the same group of people. You got to know each other really well, and you had pretty passionate arguments. But we all, in those days, we all still kind of laughed and enjoyed each other's time. We spent a lot of time socially with one another as well. We all went to lunch together. You were like brothers and sisters and friends, or, you were mates. You just hung out, and the arguments could get pretty intense, but you were arguing passionately about something that you really cared about. I mean, Carnivale was different. Carnivale was a divided writer's room that genuinely did not like each other. Half of them really didn't like the other half. And that was a different situation. That was much more difficult as a showrunner to deal with. It made for it was the most unhappy room I think I've ever had in my whole career. And it was very atypical, because typically, you put these people together, you're all in the same boat, and you're trying to make the best show you can. You're all invested in everybody's episodes. You want the show to be as best as it possibly can be. And, everyone just kind of gets along. You always have personalities that scrape against one another now and again. But, you all kind of work it out, and it all becomes, you're there to do something bigger, and you just all invest in the show.
Awesome. Another show that I love that you had a little something to do with was Battlestar Galactica. And I think the thing that really, really interests me about that is if I go into a forum or Reddit or something and I say, hey, everybody, let's talk about All Good Things, the last episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. Everybody is going to say, oh, it's one of the best finales in TV history. And that's over. But if I go into the same room and I say Battlestar Galactica Daybreak, a debate will instantly spark up. People will be arguing about the episode's place in the series. Which one of those actually is more gratifying as a writer? The universal acclaim or the debates?
Hard to say. They took place at such different moments in my life and in my career. And, one I was the showrunner of, bringing it into the story. The other, I was someone who was brought in, who had been with the show a long time and was writing it with a partner.
Yeah.
When we did All Good Things, Brandon and I didn't even expect to write it. We thought Michael Tiller was going to do it. That was the assumption on the show, and Tiller just kind of abruptly handed it to us one day, to our shock. And we were doing Generation simultaneously, and we just kind of tossed it off. And we just banged out All Good Things in a very short period of time, and we'd spent a good solid year working on Generations, and All Good Things just kind of worked, and Generations didn't. So it was one of those great ironies. I don't even remember the writing of All Good Things very well, because we were so in the trenches, and it was so intense with that in the movie, and just trying to make it work, and it was just hard. It was really oh my God, are we ever going to finish this? And Daybreak, did by myself. It was a much more emotional investment for me in the show and personally, because I was running the show and I was bringing it to a conclusion, and it was tying up a lot of different plot threads that we had established over the years. Whereas All Good Things is really still a bit of a one-off. It's still kind of an episodic story in and of itself, even though it's definitely touching back to the pilot and other little threads along the way. Next Gen by its nature was an episodic show, and Battlestar was much more of a serialized program. So they were very, very different. I mean, for me, I really liked Daybreak. When I watched it again a year or two ago, when my son finally watched the series, and he and I watched it together, and I was very proud of it, and I still was moved by it. And I think it's a proper ending to that story. And the fact that I think people still argue about it, I wish that there was universal acclaim. Everybody loved it. Absolutely. I'm sure I do. But the fact that people still care enough about it that they will argue about it is good too. I'll take that, and I'm happy with it, and I have no regrets about it. And I feel like it's a good piece of work.
Another thing that tends to get argued about as well, especially in science fiction culture, is Star Trek versus Star Wars. Of course, big things happening in the Star Wars universe. I'm not sure if you're aware of some things that are happening, but one of the things that you were working on potentially was a show for ABC. and you worked with George Lucas on it. How was that experience, working with Lucas?
It was an amazing experience, and it actually wasn't for ABC. It was George was going to do the show himself. It was a similar process to when he did the Clone Wars TV show. He basically just produced, a whole bunch of Clone Wars episodes and didn't show them to anybody, didn't pitch them to anybody, basically finished them and then went to a network and said, here it is, take it, please. And he wanted to do the same thing with the Star Wars live action show. He didn't want to deal with networks. He didn't want to deal with studios and development and all that kind of crap. And he didn't need to. He was richer than God. He could do whatever he wanted. So he basically got a group of us in sort of an international writer's room that would assemble every 6 to 8 weeks over the course of a couple of years. And some players kind of came and went, depending on their other obligations. And we would meet at Skywalker Ranch, and we would sit and break stories with George, for after full days. And it was amazing. It was really, he was quite a character. He was really interesting and funny and strange, and it was a unique experience, and I'm just really happy that I got to do that. I wrote a couple of episodes, a couple of scripts. I think we wrote like 40 some odd scripts.
Wow.
For the show, and George wanted to write them all ahead of time, so we wrote them all, and then he said, okay, we're going to stop here, and then he wanted to go off and explore various production, how he would produce it, where he would produce it, how much it would be. And then we would kind of hear that periodically, that it's still a little too expensive for what he wants to spend. He's trying to figure out, where does he want to do it, and what auspices he would do it under. And, time passed, and then next thing you know, I read in the paper, he's sold Lucasfilm lock, stock, and barrel to Disney. And I never heard anything about the show again until I literally read Robert Iger, who's the head of ABC, just mentioned casually that he had all these scripts and that I had written one of them. And because of that mention, suddenly everybody keeps asking him for a Star Wars TV show, because it was never part of ABC. It was just sold, to Disney,
right,
and it ended up with them.
That's probably where my brain went. Yeah, I probably just instantly thought ABC because it's just been in the news lately. Yeah.
Yeah. So are those scripts dead, you think, or there's any chance they could revive those scripts for a Star Wars TV show? Because there are rumors that ABC is curious about a TV show. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not. I've heard various rumors. I'm sure Disney is placing a huge bet on this universe, and I'm sure there are discussions going on about potential TV shows, but who knows?
I gotcha. We've also had William Sadler on the show before, and we asked him about Sloane, and he loved Sloane. And
Sloane was great.
I kind of asked him about Section 31, but I want to know your thoughts. Is Section 31 a necessary evil inside the Federation's kind of hug it out mentality?
That was always the question in the room. We always wanted to play with that very question and never really wanted to give it a definitive answer. What we wanted to say was that an organization like this would exist even in a utopian-esque organization like the Federation, that this will happen. This kind of thing will happen because there are people that believe that we haven't gotten far enough, that we have to go outside the law in some areas, we have to do the things that no one else will do, and someone has to do the dirty work, and all those sorts of reasons and rationales would eventually, create an organization like Section 31, and the debate would never end about whether it was a necessary evil or an abomination. It just would be.
Would you feel more secure with Section 31 or without one, if you're a Federation citizen?
That's a hard question. I mean, I think you would have both. I feel on one level more secure with the National Security Agency, and I abhor it at the same time. I think these are difficult questions.
Right.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's hard to. The civil liberties part of my heart tells me, they should not exist. They should not do what they do. It's wrong. It violates the principles of what we're supposed to stand for. And yet there is a part of you that that is frightened by events in the world, that sees things happening, and you hope that out there somewhere in the cloak and dagger world, somebody's out there trying to keep the world safe for democracy. So it's hard. I think there are no real clear answers to that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. Well, we don't want to take up too much more of your time, so just the last question. I want to know what's more likely to happen: Miami Dolphins win the Super Bowl, or you're back to work on a new Star Trek TV show?
both those are extremely low probability. Extremely low. Like, you could get really good odds in Vegas on both those properties.
You've been so much fun to talk to. It's been a delight.
Well, sure, it's my pleasure.
Thanks a lot, Ron. Good speaking to you.
All right, guys. Thank you.